This is Bringing the Darkness to the Light with Catherine Nadal, professional psychic medium.
Today's guest is Sam Baltrusis, author of Ghosts of Salem and featured in The Curse of Lizzie Borden. Shock Doc has penned 18 paranormal-themed books, including recently released Ghosts of Sleepy Hollow, Haunts of the Headless Horseman. It's a pleasure to have you on, Sam.
Thanks for having me on.
I know. You know, it's so interesting because you and we met together this past October. We were both working in Salem with Charles Rosenay. And it was interesting because we were situated right next to each other. And the minute I met you, I was like, oh, you're an author, I'm an author. And then we just started talking. And we've had so many adventures since then. So I look forward to this interview.
It's good. Yeah. So it's weird when I sat right next to you. Of course, when you're sitting next to another psychic medium, you're kind of like, you get your guard up. So I was like, okay, let's figure her out. And then I heard a little voice, and I think it's my grandmother. She's like, talk to her. And I'm like, okay. It was my Catholic grandmother. She was like, talk to her.
Yes, I know. Well, I always say, I have this expression that I say, fun people make fun friends. So, and you're definitely a fun friend. So very cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I know you have 18 books here, so you have a lot to talk about. But I wanted to start out, I often tell people that I was a little girl in kind of a very strict Roman Catholic family, and my dad didn't like the idea that I was having these dreams that were coming true, and that I was telling him these things, and they were turning out to be true. And we had a lot of stress in my household, so that was not something that he wanted me to be entertained with, but it was quite apparent. And it hasn't left me since. So how did it start out for you as a little boy?
So kind of similar. I mean, so I grew up in Chicago. My dad was in the Navy, so I was born in Florida, and then we moved up to Chicago when I was very young. And in Chicago, my grandmother, who I referenced earlier, she's the one that's sort of like my spirit guide person that talks to me in my ear. Strict Catholic, very Catholic. My mother was she was going along with the Catholicism. She wasn't raised Catholic herself. So when my parents divorced, we moved back to Florida, where my mother grew up. And we actually stayed at my grandfather's house after the divorce. And that's when I started having dreams, prophetic dreams. I would have visitations from my grandfather, who passed away right before we moved down. And it turns out I was actually staying in my grandfather's room, my granddaddy's room, and I didn't even know it. So it was like I was I felt his energy in the room, and he would sit on the corner of the bed. And my mom was like, who are you talking to? And I'm like, granddaddy. And and so it was early on for me, but then it started getting darker as it progressed. So my mother was very open-minded, and she was supportive, but my mother's was very religious too. I would say more spiritual than religious. And looking back at it now, my mom embraces her gifts, as does my sisters have it as well. So it's kind of runs in the family, and it turns out my grandfather did as well. So it does pass down, I believe, through family. It's actually through my mom's line where it passes down. But so yeah, it's something that it didn't seem weird to me having imaginary friends and having my grandfather sit on the bed, even though he had passed. But then I had a visitation, probably around 8 years old, of a man wearing a hat with red glowing eyes, like looking in the window. And that's when I shut down. And after that, took me many years to kind of get back into it after having that experience. And the man with the hat has visited me since then. But I don't think it's the hat man. I believe it's something, it was a family member that happens to wear a hat.
Okay, so just for the sake of the audience, did you see him with your eyes open or closed? Because we always talk about being clairvoyant. Like, I'll talk to someone and I'll say something, and they'll say, how did you get that? And I'm like, well, it's written right over your head. Like I literally can see like writing over someone's head and no one else can see it. So that's a perfect example of being clairaudient. Clairvoyant actually, and clairaudient is like what you said, where your grandmother said, "Hey, talk to her." So that's clairaudient. So
Right.
did you see him with your eyes open or closed?
I saw him with my eyes open, and so did my sister. And so he and the times that I've seen him since then, it wasn't in my mind's eye; it was actually with my eyes open. So this has happened more than once. This visitation, so that's what really freaked me out. Even with my grandfather sitting on the corner of the bed, he actually was like an outline. So I physically saw him, but using as someone that identifies as clairvoyant and also clairaudient, and I have the other clairs as well, but it kind of shifts depending on who I'm with. But I think that the clairvoyance was still it was really raw, and now I can kind of control it more. But when I was a kid, I could physically see him, my grandfather, and then also see the man with the hat.
Oh, wow. So I can understand you being young and shutting down from that. So when did you, kind of get more involved? Like, what did you do? Like, you continue doing your schooling? What was everyday life for you being in Florida as a young child?
So growing up, and it was a fairly conservative part of Florida, Pensacola, Florida, and I think like be I've always had my gift was always there. So I would know things that people are like, how do you know that? And I'm like, I just know. And so that's claircognizance. So like it kind of shifts from whatever you need, it kind of shifts into that mode. And so I would just know things. And my mom is a claircognizant as well. She just knows. And I'm like my mom would say, listen, I want you not to, go out with your friends tonight. And I'm like, why, mom? She said, I just know. I just know. And and it turns out like one of them got into a car accident, or she was really good at protecting me, and I have that too. So I'll just know like not to do a certain thing, like get on a plane or avoid certain situations just by knowing. And I was a journalist for 20 years, and I used my gifts as a journalist, but kind of on the down low. I would just know things, and a lot of the things I would just know were, it's intuition too, and I would just say, oh, I just have a really good intuition, but truthfully, it's claircognizance.
Yeah, I find this very interesting because you talk about how family members also had that. And unfortunately, I mean, I've checked out both sides of my family, and nobody has fessed up to any memory or any indication that anyone else in the family was like me. So it's quite possible that there is someone in another line, at a different level that I never met, or that basically, other people that are still alive have not met. So I think it's cool that you had that and you were able to kind of identify that with other family members. Didn't have that. So I was like, kind of steering ahead on my own. But I think it's interesting because when I met you, the first thing we started doing was talking about writing. And, I have very early memories about writing stories as a kid. My best friend Cookie and I would watch a movie like Outsiders, and we're like, oh, let's, write a book about teenage boys or whatever, like The Outsiders, like, so that was like my early writing. But even in that early writing, I saw that I could really formulate a story. And some people don't have that. Some people have a hard time writing a sentence or a paragraph or getting through an essay in school. And to me, the more I wrote, the easier it was. So what were your first experiences writing? Was it like storytelling, or was it just, school stuff like essays?
It, so for me, like growing up, so my didn't have a lot of money. So like we grew up in kind of after my parents' divorce, moved to Florida, and just in a situation where I didn't have a lot of the resources that other people that went to school with me had. So I was always a creative kid, and so I actually writing for me was almost my way out of Pensacola, and so even as I won all sorts of like national awards as a writer, even in like junior high, high school. I would write. I was like editor of my yearbook, and I remember like and my teacher, who I still cite. She's still alive, and she's amazing, Mrs. R. Who was the one that said, she kind of pointed me out. She's like, "You're gifted," and yeah, even at a young age. And I dedicated my first few books to Mrs. Reinschmidt, and just knowing that. Almost like it was my creative outlet. It was sort of my way of, you didn't need at the time we didn't have computers, not to age us or anything. So I would just do it. I had a typewriter, and so I would like literally like type my stories and my yearbook copy or my newspaper copy when I was a kid. I went to college for journalism, and so that's when my skills were sharpened. And I went to Boston University for college, which at the time had one of the top communication schools in the country. So I went from small town boy to the big time, just by going to a better school. And getting the education that you need. And really the toolbox that I developed in college is I've used that for many years. So kind of fine-tuned my skills in college and was a print journalist. I was a TV producer. I was a radio show producer as well. So I use my skills as a writer to do these other mediums.
That's so interesting. So did you stay in that Boston U area, or did you go to New York from there? Where was your location after graduating?
So I stayed in Boston for a year after, and then I moved to New York City for 10 years. And then there it went from like a kind of like a big fish in a smaller pond. Boston, even though it's a city, compared to New York, it's nothing. And so I ended up going from Boston to New York City, and then my first job really was pretty good. It was at Newsweek magazine, and so I was an intern there, but it was a paid internship. And then after the internship, I stayed in New York. My first job after Newsweek was ABC Radio, and that's how I got into radio. And then I worked for MTV, VH1, kind of worked my way up. And then when you get to a certain point when you work for MTV and VH1, where you're kind of like over the hill, they're like, hey, it's time to, go on to a different network. So everybody moved to Los Angeles, and I didn't want to move to LA. I don't like earthquakes. And speaking of earthquakes, we had an earthquake in New England today, and I'm like, okay, this is why I did not go to California, because I didn't like the driving there, didn't like just the vibe in California. So I ended up I went back to Florida at the time to kind of like regroup, and I started running for my local newspaper down in Florida, and then moved back to Boston in 2007.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So the New York City thing, you and I have that in common. I mean, I've been in New York City almost my entire life. And I know different parts of it. Just being in New York City actually inspires you for storytelling. I mean, just walking out your door and going to the subway, or walking out your door and going to a coffee shop, you can create three or four different stories on your walk there. There's always
Well,
something happening around you in New York.
it's weird because like even though I was working in the communication field, even whether it's radio or TV, it still didn't kind of satisfy what I have now as an author. And I remember saying, hey, I'm a writer. Like if I would meet people or what out in New York, and they're like, what have you written? And I'm like, articles. I haven't really written anything. And so looking back at that time, I always identified as an author, but I didn't necessarily put the work in to create a book. And as a journalist, I'm really proud of my work as a journalist, but it was like 1,000 words to 1,500 words per article. And then when I got the book deal, when I moved back to Boston, I got a book deal for Ghost of Boston, and that ended up turning. I was like, okay, can I really write a book now that I have this contract? And I looked at journalism, like I was writing 1,000 words per day I'm like, you know what, if I do that and apply it to a book, that can actually eventually turn into a book. So I kind of wrote my first book with the idea that I was writing several articles kind of put together. And that's how I was able to kind of get through my first book.
Well, that makes sense. How did you get the publishing deal like that? How did that come about? Who did you meet to get that done?
So I was a the journalist part was really put me out there. So I was a well-known name as a journalist at this point in Boston. I moved back to Boston in 2007, and by 2009 I was getting regular freelance gigs. So I was getting magazines, local magazines. I was editor of two magazines in Cambridge and Somerville, and they saw an article that I wrote for Stuff Magazine, which is a local magazine that's no longer in Boston. And I sent them that article and I showed them like my resume with all my writing credentials. And they gave me actually a 3-book deal based on that. Now, I was expecting if you write a book that you're going to be like, not rich, but you'll be able to be a professional writer. And then I got my first check after writing my first book. And I'm like, okay, this is, this is not going to pay the bills. So I had to supplement that with other things like doing readings and giving tours and what I tried to do for many years. And I feel like that I'm still struggling with this is to do jobs that are related to my books.
Yes, well, you're in the right place, to be honest. And that Boston Salem area is really rich of history, but also rich of storytelling. That's really cool. So, your first book, let's just talk about that. I mean, to get that first one of 3, how did it come about that you were going to do a ghost story? Like, how did they just come up with that? Was that your idea or was that the publishing idea?
So I had written the article for Stuff Magazine. It was called Haunted Hotspots in Boston. So I took that article. They had read it and they said, "Hey, we really like your writing style, and then we would like a book on Boston, and we need it in like 3 months." And I'm like, "Okay." So it started off kind of crazy in the sense that I had a few months to write this book. I reached out to my good friend Andrew Warburton, who is now a fellow author. He's just written a book on New England, the fairies, the Fae in New England. But at the time, he was helping me as for research. So he was at the library. I was at my computer. I managed to write my first book in under 3 months. And this is, I was also giving tours in Boston too. So it really helped being a tour guide and also writing the book at the same time. After that first book, I'm like, you know what? I have to immerse myself in the location to be able to write a really good book. And luckily, the first book I wrote. Goes to Boston while being a tour guide. And so I kind of did both in tandem, and that actually worked out really well. So I've tried my best every book that I write to kind of immerse myself in the location that I'm writing about.
What was the second book? Because this is one of 3. So, what was the second one? What did you kind of pivot
So,
off to?
so the first one was Ghost of Boston. The second one was Ghost of Cambridge, and that one was. I wouldn't say it was a dud. It was actually it's a great book, but because it's such a smaller market, it didn't sell very well. And my third book was Ghost of Salem, which continues to be my bestseller. And that was when I really broke into the market after writing Ghost of Salem. So Cambridge was my second book, and again, it was difficult because there wasn't really a lot of there wasn't like tours in Salem, so I actually created a ghost tour in Cambridge right around Harvard University to kind of generate stories for my books. And my stories are nonfiction, and so a lot of it is people talking about their experiences with the paranormal. And so I interviewed a lot of people for all 3 of those books. I didn't really put myself into it until Ghost of Salem. Ghost of Salem, I put myself into the first chapter, the introduction, and people really love that. And so that's how I write now. So I write based on my personal, kind of like a travel log at these locations. And at first, I was kind of purely journalistic in my approach to the paranormal.
Yes. When you mentioned Cambridge, I've been there several times, but what are the common stories about that? I mean, is it really that there's haunted areas of, Harvard, or what is the kind of the hot spot there in Cambridge?
So Cambridge has a lot of American Revolutionary War history, believe it or not. Like that's right. Like during the precursor to the American Revolution, that's where all the troops hung. They were kind of in this Cambridge Common. So there's that whole area right by Harvard, in front of Harvard, is Harvard Square is just a hotspot of paranormal activity. Uh, yep, every pretty much every dorm in Harvard has a ghost story. So like if you even on my tour, I was able to walk in the middle of Harvard Yard, and this is before COVID, and so you can literally like bring your tour inside Harvard Yard and talk about the ghost stories associated with each of the dorms, or they're called halls at Harvard. But so all the halls in Harvard are allegedly haunted. Although I wasn't able to get inside them while I was giving the tours until after I wrote the second book. Uh, and then I was able to go in because they're like, hey, you're actually legit. Because I think when people, especially in New England, they were really apprehensive about kind of going on the record with ghost stories. So you have a lot of anonymous sources, like, this person that works for Memorial Hall is one of the locations in Harvard that's really haunted. It kind of looks like Hogwarts when you go inside. And so my friend worked there, and he brought me in, but he's like, "Hey, I'll tell you the story, Sam, but I'm not going to go on the record." And so I have a lot of that in my first three books. And then, well, Salem is a whole, and having worked in Salem, that Salem is very open about its ghost lore. So I went from two fairly tight-lipped communities. Like Boston was pretty tight-lipped when it came to their ghosts. Cambridge was very tight-lipped. They were like, no way I'm going to go on the record. I'm going to lose my job at Harvard, And then the third book, Salem, was the whole, everybody went on the record. they were like, but it's weird. I will say this: Salem is weird about its ghosts too, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that spectral evidence was used in 1692 to accuse 20 innocent people for witchcraft. And I think even in the Wiccan or the witch community, I interviewed Lori Cabot for Wicked Salem, which is my second book on Salem. And she's like, Sam, I don't believe in ghosts. And I'm like, okay. And then meanwhile, while I'm interviewing Lori Cabot, there's like these knocking noises coming throughout her workshop. And I'm like, Lori, what is that? And she's like, oh, those are just my Cornish knockers. And apparently someone gifted her Cornish knockers. And I'm like, okay,
What are
Lori.
they?
Well, they're little, like, I guess, like little fairies that knock. When she told me, she said that the knockers, and I know it's like a weird name, but the knockers will knock if there's something, like if there's danger. She said that the knockers, the knockers, basically, like, there was one time there was carbon monoxide in her home, and she woke up to hearing knocking, and she left her home, and it turned out there was carbon monoxide. So those fairies basically saved her life, according to her story. So I believe her. I have never experienced Cornish knockers or fairies, but I also think that they're really interesting. And I think basically people, I've experienced paranormal and ghosts. Some people may say it's something else, like a fairy, or like a puckwudgie. We have puckwudgies in New England, and so whether I think you see what you can handle, basically.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's so interesting about the fairies and the description of the knockers. I wanted to scoop back to one thing you had said before. Your first book was about Boston. And when I was in the military, we used to teach something called MDMP, which is Military Decision Making Process. And basically, we would teach the troops about making critical decision making in the military. But a lot of our work that we did was to go back in time, and we would talk about the history of decisions that were made in battle. And we would very often, maybe once or twice a year, go out to Rhode Island, go out to Boston, and we would do something called a staff ride. And I'm sure if I read out a couple of places we went to, you would probably recognize them. But we went to Miriam's Corner. There was quite a few places we went. But one of the places we went to on the staff ride was a famous bar in Boston. And I think it was called the Green Dragon. I don't know if that's correct. There was something about a dragon or something to the name of it. And it was kind of interesting because we went around to each spot, almost like your tour guide experience. But as the instructors, we had to talk about what was happening at the time and why these leaders made these decisions at the time. And, everyone was like turning around and saying, like, how do you feel, Nadal? Like, they all knew who I was and what was going on, my, background as a psychic. And they're like, so Nadal, how do you feel right now? How do you feel in this spot right now? And, it's a little bit of a hee hee ha ha kind of a thing. But literally in certain places, I did feel it's a different feeling. It's more than what you would say, well, this feels historic. You get a different vibe on the place. And in that old bar, I felt very connected to that place. Is it called the Green Dragon? Do you know the place that I'm talking about?
I think you're talking about maybe the Bell and Tavern, but it's like the Green Dragon, like that's what it was called back in the 1600s. So just to kind of like that whole bar area and I know the area that you're talking about. It's right by like Haymarket and the North End, and then also Faneuil Hall. And the taverns, by the way, back in the 1600s, like during or 1700s during the American Revolution, the taverns were the nerve centers of the American Revolution. So people would gather at taverns to hash out what they were going to do, like with the battle plans, that sort of thing. So I don't drink, so I haven't been to a tavern in a long time. But I think it's the Bell and Tavern. It's right in that area, right where you probably would have gone. There's the Union Oyster House, which also has a storied history as well. And what's interesting about that area too is that it's right by at the time that was waterfront property. So the Boston Harbor, which played a major role during the American Revolution, the water came up all the way up to the bars. So people would actually drop off fish and stuff like in the window and it would hop in the boats. Boston Harbor, and I actually wrote a book called Haunted Boston Harbor. That was my book after Salem. And I love that book because there was a lot of military history, a lot of stuff that happened in Boston Harbor that a lot of people didn't know about, really. There's a lot of the islands it was a major player in the American Revolution.
Now I have to go and read that book because I'm sure reading that book is going to remind me about that staff ride and all of that, the details of that. That's really incredible. It's one other aspect of that story, as you started to talk about it, but we had also had a military meeting, part of the staff ride in Lexington, Concord, that area. And there's like kind of the center of square, but there's a really old, I want to call it like a bed and breakfast kind of a place. And everyone goes there. It's got like a restaurant and then you could stay there as well. And that place was filled with activity. Do you know the place I'm talking about?
Yeah, and actually I wrote a book on it. But yeah, it's called Concord's Colonial Inn, and my book is called Ghost to Concord's Colonial Inn. And getting back to the immersion, I actually immersed myself. I actually worked there. So I worked the overnight shift at Concord's Colonial Inn. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the history there was a lot of like kind of untangling the truth when it comes to the history. There's a lot of legend associated with it that it was used as a makeshift hospital. And it was used as a triage for both the Patriots and also for the Redcoats that were injured at the Battle of Concord and Lexington. And by the way, we're coming up on the 250-year anniversary of that battle in April. And so having worked there and kind of like untangling all the myths and legends, and it's very haunted. And everybody that worked there had a story. Everybody that stayed there had a story. I had so much material by working the overnight shift at that location for the book. And the book actually came out last year. So it's still a fairly, 2023. So it's less than 2 years old.
Well, you really are going to create a bookshelf for me because I'm going to get every one of your books, Sam, because I'm realizing a lot of the things that we had done in just my, recent military. I mean, I'm retired now, but not that long ago, we were doing this work. And while we're talking about it, I can see it almost like a little mini movie in my head. That restaurant was exclusive. I mean, that place was, I mean, I can imagine working there. It's just really incredible. But that's a beautiful place. That whole area, there's a lot of those roundabouts in that area. And I don't know, I had heard a story about roundabouts. I don't know if it's true or not, but the roundabouts tend to be a lot in that Boston area. But the roundabouts actually date back to kind of that wartime stuff too, where how the roads came together. I don't know if that's correct or not, but there's a lot of roundabouts.
Well, yeah, the roundabouts, like, if you look, and it's interesting, a lot of the roundabouts have in the center or next to the roundabout has a haunted location, which I find kind of interesting. Maybe I could do a whole book on roundabouts in Massachusetts.
I
But
think so. I'm giving you more work, Sam.
so the roundabout in Concord is that's Monument Hill, or there's like a monument in the center, and at the very end is where Concord's Colonial Inn is. Facing Concord's Colonial Inn, take a right, you'll hit the bridge where the Battle of Lexington and Concord took place, and also right next to the bridge, there's a place called the Old Manse, and there's a lot of legend and lore associated with the Old Manse as well. But when you talk about specific properties in New England, some of them embrace their ghosts and some of them don't want to be known as being haunted, even though it's extremely haunted. And Concord's Colonial Inn is considered to be one of the most haunted inns in the country. And when I wrote the book and even worked there, they embraced their ghosts and people actually came and ghost hunted there. I'm not sure. So, like, now it's interesting. They kind of go back and forth whether or not they want to embrace it. What they don't want to do is they don't want to scare patrons. They don't want people to go there and to be terrified. I actually had people stay at Concord's Colonial Inn and be terrified. Like, they'll check in and they'll, like, I just had an experience. I saw a soldier at the corner of my bed and literally check out. And I'm like, did you really? I mean, did you really see a ghost in the corner of your bed, or is it sort of your projection of what you were expecting? So I tried to be as objective as possible, and even like the rooms in Concord's Colonial Inn was room 24 and room 27. So there's been all these legends that room 24 is where they did the surgeries during the battle. So Dr. Timothy Mino was his name. That's where he supposedly did the surgeries, and there's a ghost of a Revolutionary War soldier that haunts the room because he died in the room supposedly. And then room 27 was supposedly the morgue where he dumped all the bodies. Now, having dug deep into the history of Concord's Colonial Inn, that actually wasn't even built into the 1800s. So the fact that people are having these terrifying experiences with soldiers in the rooms, the infirmary room, it turns out that actually it didn't happen there. So I don't know,
That's so
like,
interesting.
yeah. And so part of me, and I've had experiences in room 24 actually. So it's sort of someone that is clairvoyant. I saw what looked like a soldier. So I have to kind of like look at I'm a historian in addition to being a clairvoyant. So kind of like balance the different sides. Like, I have experienced what I would consider to be a residual haunting. So it's like a videotape replay that plays over and over again of what looks like a soldier or like a man. Like, you can tell it's a man versus a woman crawling on the floor, kind of crawling toward you, coming out of the bathroom of all places. So he's like crawling on the floor. So I feel like maybe he was wounded somehow, or he somehow migrated to that room, or it's something that was what we call an egregore or a thought form manifestation. So something that was created by telling that story over and over again. And that room is investigated pretty much every night. So it's going to generate ghosts. It's going to kind of create like a psychic imprint, whether or not it actually happened in that room.
Wow. Well, I'm very excited about this. I'm very excited, more importantly, that you just mentioned about the anniversary, 250 years. I mean, that's incredible. So they'll probably have a lot of celebrations and, maybe you should do a tour. I would sign up for a tour if you go over there for the for the anniversary. I'll do an anniversary tour with you. How's that?
Well, I tried to actually book Concord's Colonial Inn. So the people that manage Concord's Colonial Inn actually changed since I worked there. So it's kind of had a heavy turnover. I do want to find a way to get kind of like to either give a tour or be a part of it, like an investigation at Concord's Colonial Inn during that period. Because I do feel like that the anniversary does kind of it's almost like it amplifies the paranormal activity. And even in my book, there was what sounded like cannon fire in Concord while I was working the overnight. And I'm like, wait a minute, was that a recreation or a reenactment? And I checked with my friends who actually were volunteers, and they're like, no, that was not a recreation. Like that was a phantom cannon. So as it gets closer to the anniversary, whether the 250, I'm assuming it's going to be even more, amped up with all the activity there. The activity does intensify.
Yes, well, we'll have to keep posted on this because now I'm excited about that. So you've written quite a lot. I mean, there's a lot here. So what would you have to say other highlighted, like, your highlighted books or your most recent book? What would you like to talk about? I mean, we have so many stories. I'm sure you have so many stories, not just writing your books, but investigations you've been part of. And so your most recent book is The Ghost of Sleepy Hollow. So it's a beautiful book, I know. I have a long history with Sleepy Hollow. I actually went to high school in Dobbs Ferry. I went to college in Dobbs Ferry. I'm a graduate of Mercy College in Dobbs Ferry. So I was very, very much affiliated with the Hudson Valley and the Hudson River, and many friends over the years. One friend actually lived in Sleepy Hollow for like a decade or two, and that town is just amazing. I've been to the cemetery, and I've been, to that whole Tarrytown area. It's beautiful. So tell me how you got involved with writing The Ghost of Sleepy Hollow.
So, having worked in Salem, Massachusetts, I was giving tours in Salem and doing all sorts of stuff in Salem. Like, you know what? I want to look at other popular Halloween destinations. And it just kind of clicked when I was living in New York City. I would actually go to Sleepy Hollow pretty much like I would go when I was going to school in Boston. I would go to Salem during October. And so I'm like, you know what, Sleepy Hollow. So there was an event that I went to, it was a Paracon about 4 years ago. And I had a lot of experiences, and I was staying at Sleepy Hollow Hotel, and I went to Sunnyside, which is Washington Irving's later in life home. I went to the cemetery on the tour, and I just loved it. It was sort of like revisiting something that brought me a lot of joy when I was younger. And I was also, at the time, I was a huge Washington Irving fan. And after writing the book, I kind of see a different side to him. I'm not necessarily, I didn't lose respect for him. I just look at him in a different light. I kind of put him on the same plateau as like Edgar Allan Poe. And the truth is, Washington Irving was a master when it comes to brands and creating a brand. And so his skill set was very different than, say, Edgar Allan Poe or Nathaniel Hawthorne. And Washington Irving created Santa Claus. So he was like sort of like the master of creating legends. And I really feel like, looking at having written Ghost of Sleepy Hollow, I view that I think he almost created the ghost in Sleepy Hollow just by creating this legend. I think he wanted to make it more spooky, if you will, and give it sort of the legend and lore that he was accustomed to when he lived in England. And a lot of the stuff that you in the Legend of Sleepy Hollow was based on stuff that he heard as a young boy when he was living in New York City. But there was either a yellow fever or tuberculosis scare. I forget what happened, but he was staying in the Hudson Valley at one point in his life, and he loved it as well, just like I did. He actually wrote it when he was in Birmingham, England. So he wrote Legend of Sleepy Hollow, which kind of became his, the story that he was known for. And he comes back many years later after the success of Legend of Sleepy Hollow and bought a home and created Sunnyside, which is also allegedly haunted too. And a lot of people reported having experiences with a Headless Horseman ghost, which is the whole backstory is that it was a Hessian soldier that lost his head during the Battle of White Plains. And like, that's the what we think was the inspiration. We don't really know if he was inspired by this real life story. What I will say is, Washington Irving has always said that it was fiction, but the truth is he did write a story after it kind of went into the actual nonfiction piece on it, and it still was kind of hyperbole, if you will. It was still a little bit fantastical when it comes to the paranormal. So I think a lot of the ghosts of Sleepy Hollow were created, but I also think that there's something to it too. I think when you go there, it does have the same vibe that you have when you're in Salem, except for you don't have the guilt. So Salem, there was actually 20 innocent people accused and executed for witchcraft. And when I was doing the research for Ghost of Sleepy Hollow, I didn't have the same guilt that I had when I wrote my books on Salem. There was, of course, American Revolutionary War history there, and that part I loved about it, but there wasn't the bloodshed and there wasn't the anger and the rage, all the emotions that are so strong and still you can still feel it in Salem, Massachusetts. You don't have that in Sleepy Hollow, but you do have the eerie aesthetic, and you have the Headless Horseman is sort of like the local mascot, and it's just so much fun going there. And the writing and researching the book on Sleepy Hollow was probably my favorite book of all the 18 to write.
Yeah, well, I would have to agree with you because that area really has a really certain vibration. After I had recently seen you, after we were in Salem, you said, "Oh, I'm going to be doing something in Rockland County." And we ended up getting together and you were talking about your books. And it was a lovely night. It was a book talk and it was really nice. And it was right around Halloween. And you said, I said, well, I haven't been to Washington Irving's house. And you said, well, you have to go. So I actually went on Halloween, this past Halloween. And it was like a perfect day. I'm not kidding you. It was like 67 degrees, like unseasonably warm. It was a beautiful day. The sun was on the river. And I went there and I remember like walking into his home, and they're very strict with their tours. So you get a little delayed in each room as they move people through. It's a big house, but it's a small house at the same time. And I was standing in the room where he did all of his writing. And you feel like, wow, this is like a powerful place, when you think about all of those books that surrounded him and then him just sitting there writing at that desk. And just pretty incredible to think that this is a place that he really enjoyed, but it's a place where he probably continued to write at. And I just found it really remarkable, just the way the land is around his home and the way the house is situated, that it's just literally perched on that kind of like a beacon of a hill that you could see the river, you could see the Palisades, you could see all of that. So just being in that location, I could see how he had so much to say. It's just pretty incredible.
Yeah, so actually, when I was writing Ghost of Sleepy Hollow, I went the previous Halloween. So my story is a lot different than your story because I was staying at the Terrytown House Estate, which on the map it looks like Sunnyside's very close to it, and it is very close to it. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to walk to Jonathan Kruk, who you've actually gone to one of his performances, and they're amazing. So I'm like, I have to see Jonathan Kruk on Halloween night. So I'm at Terrytown House Estate, and I decided to, instead of taking an Uber or taking a cab to the location, I'm like, I'm going to walk there. So I decided to walk down Sunnyside Lane, it's called, and I was fine at first, and then it started getting dark, and then before I knew it, it was like literally walking down this path that was dark as dark can be. Cars were kind of zooming by. There was no sidewalk, no way, the pedestrian sidewalk. So I felt like I was part of Ghost of Sleepy, like Legend of Sleepy Hollow that night. So I finally make it to the very end of the path, and there's sort of like this back entrance, which turns out to be the employees' entrance. And I go through the woods. I'm like, oh, good, I made it. I survived. I didn't get hit by a car. And so I get into the woods, and then I start seeing these people dressed in cloaks walking around in the woods. I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I heard what sounded like a horse's like neighing, and there were like horse noises coming from behind me. And I'm like, okay, so this is like I'm literally walking into the middle of the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. It's got to be a time slip. Something's going on here. And then I dart to a light, and it turns out that was where you checked in to go see the performance. And I told the lady, I'm like, ma'am, I just saw cloaked figures and I heard a horse. And she's like, oh, that was part of the reenactment. And I'm like, okay. So
That's
that night was
hilarious.
it was amazing. Like, and after I remember like finally getting to the stage, seeing Sunnyside right next to the stage, and then also seeing the Hudson River, and just kind of like like on Halloween night, I was so emotional. And Jonathan Kruk is amazing, and you've seen him perform as well. And Jonathan Kruk actually was a big player in my book Ghost of Sleepy Hollow, but I didn't know him at that time when I first saw him. And I interviewed him after, and we've become friends since then. But that was just an amazing night that I will never forget.
Wow, that's perfect. I know it's interesting because I know Jonathan, and I had seen him do a ghost tour of the Tarrytown Music Hall, which is a music hall which dates back more than 100 years. And, so I was talking to him at that, and he was like, "Yeah, I do stuff." And I had mentioned you, so he knew you. And just this past Christmas, he actually did a performance at the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in the Old Dutch Church, which again is more than, I don't know, more than 100 years old itself. And he did the whole Charles Dickens, The Christmas Carol. And that was phenomenal. I mean, literally, I mean, if you just closed your eyes, I mean, he's dressed up in character with the top hat and all that. But if you just close your eyes with his accent and everything, you literally feel like you're stepping back in time. It's just really incredible. He's really tremendous. How was he tucked into your book?
So there's a whole Jonathan Kruk chapter. So I start off like my books now are kind of like my journey as I'm immersing myself at the location. So I start off with the trip on Halloween night, heading in from Tarrytown House Estate to see Jonathan Kruk. And he's actually one of my chapters. And I actually quote him throughout the whole book. And to be honest with you, he's a little tight lipped when it comes to the ghosts, because a lot of the locations, especially Sunnyside, are really funny about their ghosts. They don't want to necessarily go on the record as being haunted because they don't want paranormal investigators to come in and with their devices and to investigate. If you ask them off the record, they're like, absolutely, it's haunted, but we can't say that publicly. And I have that in Salem too, so I kind of know how to walk the line of what I can say and what I can't say. Jonathan did say that he felt like the Washington Irving is still at Sunnyside. And I do agree with him that his energy is still there. In fact, Jonathan feels like he almost like takes him on, like kind of channels him while he's doing these performances. And having seen him perform Washington Irving's work, and also I haven't seen him do Charles Dickens, but he loves doing the Christmas Carol. So I can see him kind of like inhabiting Washington Irving. I know he did when I saw him do The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, but I'm assuming he was brilliant. And he was brilliant giving the performance of Legend of Sleepy Hollow as well. So, yeah, so he's more about kind of the expert go-to person when it comes to the history of this region, this area. And he doesn't go on the record except for one story, and that was actually in Austining, New York at the Sparta Cemetery, that he had a paranormal experience.
Well, we mentioned the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, and that place is phenomenal. I mean, that place is really amazing, and the amount of history that's there. And, it's very similar in my mind as walking through the cemetery at Salem, because some of the headstones are like completely old. I mean, you see them and you see like the ages, how young people were when they passed away. The concept of how old people are able to live now and how young people were. And also a lot of young, a lot of infants didn't make it and stuff. So as you go across and you start seeing all of these headstones, you really learn a lot. Full families at one point, seem to be, all passing around the same time. You have an interesting story that I heard you tell about the bronze woman, the
Oh, yeah.
bronze lady. So can you tell the audience that? Because I think that's really a great story.
Well, so there's the Old Dutch burying ground. That's more the historic burying ground right around the Old Dutch church. And then there's the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. So the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery is huge. And that goes all the way back. They're still interring people to this day. So if you wanted to be buried at the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, you could. So I went on a tour and actually did not make it all the way back to what is called the Bronze Lady, or I have to remember her name correctly or she's going to curse me. But the bronze lady. Anyway, so she was way in the back near the recreation Headless Horseman bridge. So my friend April and I, in January, almost like anniversary of our first visit to the bronze lady, it was in January of last year. So we decided to see this bronze lady. I'm like, April, there's the one location that I haven't been to that I really want to go to. And I didn't have the time to go when I've gone on the tours of the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. And it's this bronze statue of this woman in front of a mausoleum in the Sleepy Hollow Cemetery. She's like, "Oh, let's go." My friend April's from Jersey. So she comes in, she pulls up in her car, and I'm like, "Okay, we're gonna get off." I thought that we were gonna like walk to it and try to find it. And so she's like, "Oh no, we're gonna drive there." So April drives all the way to the back of the cemetery. We're driving like a bat out of hell in the middle of Sleepy Hollow Cemetery looking for the statue. And the first time, I'll tell you, like, we didn't have any coordinates. We just kind of knew the general vicinity of where she was. And then we found her. It was pretty easy, actually, the first time, but there's a whole story after. So we go up to the statue. April was like taking selfies in front of the statue. And I'm like, April, the statue, according to legend, if you insult the bronze lady, she will curse you. And she's like, yeah, whatever. So we're taking selfies. I'm like, you have to ask permission, April. And she's like, yeah, okay. And so the energy when we were there, I felt like it was, you can feel the energy shifts. And so we walked in front of the bronze lady. It was very cold. One of the legends is if you look in the peephole in the mausoleum facing the bronze lady, then you'll see a ghost. And I actually did see what looked like a shadow like dart by. And then this is the part that I think I really messed up. I usually walk with stones. So I had a rose quartz stone that I thought I had brought with me, and I put in my pocket just for protection or just for like grounding. And I found a rose quartz on the ground. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my rose quartz. So I pick it up and put it in my pocket. Didn't think anything of it. Turns out that I had two rose quartzes in my possession. So I ended up taking the bronze lady's rose quartz. And so we go back, and just to kind of like the legend is if you disrespect the bronze lady, things will happen. Nothing too tragic. Like there was one woman that, and it's like an urban legend for the local kids. So they would go up and they would like smack the bronze lady or take pictures or sit in the bronze lady's lap, and things would happen. So this one lady, she apparently, I think she sat in the bronze lady's lap, and a month later, her Camaro, to age her, like in the 70s, was hit by a tree. And she's like, oh yeah, so the curse of the bronze lady is true. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. So I go home, I bring this rock with me, and I realize, oh my gosh, this is not my rock. I must have taken it from the bronze lady. And then after I would hear what sounded like a woman screaming. And I'm like, I would like look out my door, and there was nothing there. Like there was no woman screaming. And then there was stuff like flickering lights. And then I was writing the chapter on the bronze lady, and my rose quartz was still at my desk. I have an antique desk where I write. And I started hearing what sounded like an alarm go off in my apartment. And I'm like, oh, it's just an alarm. I go downstairs. And by the way, this is exactly a month after going to see the bronze lady the first time. So I go back, and it turns out my entire apartment was destroyed. All the research on Sleepy Hollow, all my research on Salem, on Lizzie Borden was destroyed, and not necessarily the fire, but the water from the sprinkler system going down into my apartment. I was displaced for a month. And the apartment that I'm at now looks almost identical to the other apartment. It's in the same building, but it's not the same apartment. So I'm like, okay. And another thing too, the only thing that wasn't affected was my antique writing desk. So the only piece of furniture that I didn't have to replace or wasn't waterlogged was that antique desk with that rose quartz. I'm like, okay, so something's weird is going on with the bronze lady. I must have pissed her off. I'm like, I called my friend April, and she's like, Sam. I'm like, what? She's like, you're never going to believe this, but there was a storm in Jersey, and apparently a tree from the yard next to her the tree flew in the air, and it pierced her roof, and there was a hole in her roof, like around the same time when I had the fire. And so we had these two really bizarre things happen, and we have to go back and apologize to the bronze lady. So we go back to Sleepy Hollow. We meet up and we're all solemn and like, serious this time. No selfies. We were like, no selfies. And so we did an apology and we did feel a shift. I brought back the rose quartz stone and put it next to the bronze lady. And the story is that there's actually a real woman attached to the statue. Her name is Ann Thomas, and her husband was a military general who his name was Samuel Thomas, and he was buried in the crypt right across from her during the Civil War. So this was in the early 1900s, and so she created the statue kind of like looking at her husband's crypt. And the story is that she had it commissioned, and she thought that the statue looked really melancholy, and she asked the gentleman to redo the face on the statue. She said, "Can you do another face? Because I look really sad." And he's like, "Oh, sure, no problem." He was French. And then so he brings the new face to her of the statue. She's like, "That's it. I love it." And he's like, he drops it on the ground in front of her. He's like, "Absolutely not. Like, that's a piece of art. You have to deal with it." So she was stuck with this really melancholy looking statue looking at her husband's crypt. So the story, all sorts of stories, like you can see her crying blood and all that. And all I know is if you take a picture or shoot a video of the bronze lady, ask her permission because she may curse you.
Wow, that's incredible. So you actually had a fire in your place, or another apartment had a fire in the place?
Well, there was a fire right above mine, so there
Oh,
was some smoke
wow.
damage, but it set off. So
The
it's weird because it set
sprinklers,
off
yeah.
all the sprinklers in my, and so I was on the second floor and they were on the third floor. So all the water from there was no water damage, as much water damage in the apartment above with the fire. Mine had like knee-high water in my apartment because all the water from above came down to my apartment. So it was almost like a cesspool of all the foam that comes from fires. So everything, all my furniture, everything was destroyed.
Oh, that's terrible. And that's incredible that your friend also had like a tree piercing kind of a situation.
Yeah.
Wow. So where was Anne Thomas actually buried? Was she put in the mausoleum with her husband, or where was
Yeah,
she?
she was put with her husband, so she's not buried at the statue. The statue's there is like almost like a commemoration
Like a
of
marker.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so her remains aren't there. And do I think it's actually Ann Thomas that's haunting the location? I don't. I think it's something else. Kids from all over, they come and visit the statue. It's sort of like a late night, kind of rite of passage for the kids of Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow and North Tarrytown is what it was called back in the day. And I think that energy somehow created like an egregore or a thought form, almost like created a curse.
Well, I have to go visit her, and I will take all of your recommendations to heart. I don't need any bad luck. That's amazing. I know our time is just flying by with you. I just want to take a chance right now to have you plug any of your social media, your website, all the ways that everyone can get in touch with you and your books.
Sure. The best place to go is my website, sambaltrusis.com. It's BALTRUSIS.com. And also on Amazon. I just noticed that my book, Goes to Sleepy Hollow, kind of was rising on the charts again. It's going to be like that book alone is still. Hopefully, I'm hoping it's going to be on the same level as Salem has been for me. So definitely recommend Ghost of Sleepy Hollow. And if you haven't read my book, Ghost of Salem, those are both available at Amazon and also local bookstores too. And I really want to support and push local bookstores. Pretty much every gift shop in Sleepy Hollow now carries Ghost of Sleepy Hollow. So, and also they carry Jonathan Crux book too. So I recommend Jonathan Crux book along with Ghost of Sleepy Hollow and other social media. I have Instagram, and I know that you're better at Instagram than I am, but all the other social media, you actually showed me how to do certain like little Instagram videos, but I'm getting there with Instagram, and also I'm on X and also on Blue Sky.
Very good. Wow,
And
it's a
Baltrusis.
pleasure to have you on. We're going to roll out with a very interesting song that Bing Crosby did called The Headless Horseman. It's a pleasure to have you on, Sam. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Just gather round and I'll elucidate on what goes on outside when it gets late.
Long about midnight, the ghosts and banshees
They get together for their nightly jamboree. There's things with horns and saucer eyes, some with fangs about this size.
Some are fat and some are thin.
And some don't even wear their skin.
Oh, I'm telling you, brother, it's a frightful sight to see what goes on Halloween night. Oh, when spooks have a midnight jamboree, they break it up with fiendish glee. Ghosts are bad, but the one that's cursed is the Headless Horseman. He's the worst.
That's right, he's bad on Halloween night.
But when he goes jogging across the land, holding his noggin in his hand, demons take one look and groan, and they hit the road for parts unknown.
Beware, take care, he rides alone.
And there's no spook like Spooked Spur.
They don't like him and he's really burned.
He swears to the longest day he's dead,
He'll show them that he can get ahead.
They say he's tired of his flaming top. He's got a yen